a way of escaping the world.
I was always alone, and I always wanted to be. My mother said my first word was "alina," which means alone. Leave me alone. I always liked being on my own.
The reassurance he found with animals is missing with humans. Lucien's early attempts to cope with his conventional wealthy parents in Berlin would not last long. Lucien was a German Jew. After the very small man came to power early in 1933, Jewish businessmen became a target. Lucien's uncle, Rudolf Mosse, was one of the very first to be singled out. Lucien knew him. He would have gone to his house near Berlin.
Rudi was arrested at 5 in the morning. In his home, he was marched off, minus braces, minus belt, minus shoelaces. The indication was very clear: you're not going to enjoy where you're going. What then happened, nobody really knows, other than he died.
Ernst and Lucy Freud reacted to the murder immediately. On the 12th of August 1933, immigration papers show Ernst addressed in London, where he planned a family escape.
They were leaving security and a very easy life for a totally unknown factor.
That autumn in England, Lucy arrived and sent Lucien to board at Dartington Hall, a progressive school in Devon. Lucien could not speak English, but Dartington Hall had stables. That is why he said he decided to sleep on his own.
He was a natural horseman. And when he was at school, he realised he wasn't very sort of normal pupil, and he was put in charge of the animals, which he loved, because he had an extraordinary affinity with dogs or even birds.
Dartington was a school where you were really allowed to do whatever you wanted, and what he chose to do was to spend time with the horses. And he once said that the man who looked after the horses, the groom, was the first person that he really loved.
Since you didn't have to go into school, I took it literally, and I got up at 5 or 6 and helped the farmer milk the goats and do various other things, so I could have the horses I liked. So I used to ride nearly all day, and I got further and further behind.
His handwriting looks like like an idiotic child who's sort of written it. It's so awkward, and I remember receiving this letter inviting me to meet up and have lunch with him. And it said Lucien Freud at the bottom, and it just looked so completely unlikely to be the hand of an adult person. I mean, it just looked so childish.
In the forlorn hope that he might get a proper education, Lucien's parents moved him to Bryanston School. But he carried on as before, willful and independent.
I thought if I didn't go into the initial lessons, I would never be missed because I hadn't been initially seen. So I took that rather too far and spent all my time at the sculpture school and carved a horse out of sandstone. I was very pleased with it.
Lucien's way of being attuned to animals, horses and dogs particularly, was basic, central, fundamental. And every time he painted a horse or painted a dog, this was as much a portrait as it was of the most intimate human being with whom he was connected.
Lucien still had problems fitting in at school. One day he diverted the local hunt through Bryanston's main hall. When on a dare he dropped his trousers in the local town, he was expelled. What would his parents do with him next? At the age of 15, Lucien's determination to do exactly what he wanted paid off. He was accepted at art school on the strength of this sculpture. At the same time, in the summer of 1938, Lucien was filmed in London with his grandfather, Sigmund Freud. The founder of modern psychoanalysis had just escaped Vienna. Lucien's 4 great aunts all died in concentration camps.
He was very proud of his grandfather, but not of his grandfather as a psychiatrist. He had absolutely no time for Freud's theories of psychology. He admired his grandfather above all for being a biologist, and Freud did indeed start as a biologist, and I believe made a lot of major discoveries. Lucien always maintained that he was the one who discovered how to tell the sex of eels. Nobody before Freud had realized which was a male and which was a female eel. And Lucien's love of animals, I think, came very much from his grandfather being a biologist before he became a psychiatrist.
As a biologist, Sigmund used a microscope to make this ink drawing showing the nerves of fishes. Lucien looked very precisely at what interested him. Sigmund analysed his patients for years in the privacy of his consulting rooms. Lucien scrutinised his human subjects for years in the secrecy of his studio. Sigmund filled his space with ancient art, portrayals of the psyche and sexuality. He also had 2 mummy portraits, some of the earliest examples of a human likeness, that echoed Lucien's need to capture individuality and mortality. As a German, a Jew, and as Sigmund's grandson, the young art student had a complex but rich inheritance.
I first met Lucien very casually. He liked to make his presence felt. He was 17, I was 16. He was very distinctive looking, extraordinarily intense look, with very sharp features, and you just felt that he was sort of turned right on whenever you spoke to him. He was not like the rest of us, kind of relaxed and sloppy and silly. Lucien was kind of all wired up and ready to go, and one felt his power, and intellectual power, and his sort of physical presence. I can't exaggerate it too much. I mean, this feeling that he was already somebody.
Lucien hated it when critics claimed to see influences in his work. The prints by Dürer hung on the wall near the Titian in the family home in Berlin.
Actually, Lucien had an extraordinary admiration for the minuteness, the amazing invention of Dürer, but primarily for this amazing, intense gaze. Perhaps is characteristic of the North European. You sit and look at something in minute detail, whether it's a hair, or your mother, or a lump of grass, and you find each thing not just differently fascinating, but equally fascinating.
if you locked him away in even a dingy motel room in America, at the end of a week he'd still come out with interesting paintings. You'd find the tears on the carpet or the wall, something or other, and they'd paint it. He'd make it because he'd enjoyed looking at it somehow, the difference between this and this.
Every element in Freud's work is intensely examined.
His eyes had this rather odd way of focusing on you, where they would stare suddenly. They would maybe be in the middle of a conversation suddenly like that. Quite disconcerting. I also always sensed a sort of an absence there, that his eyes were looking at you, but actually behind those eyes he'd gone into some different mode. He must have